Alrighty, so where we left off, we took a brief introduction to custom methods with parameter types. So what I want to do here is demonstrate that. Now, as I was saying previously, we want our manager classes to be communicated with, but have no communication with whoever is communicating with our managers. So for instance, our players and our objects in the scene and anything that's going to have any type of behavior, it can communicate with the UI manager to update our UI, but our UI manager will never communicate back to them. The reason for that is because those objects could potentially be destroyed and that message could be lost. So for example, when we update our score, it's going to be coming from an enemy who is sending us a message right before it destroys itself. There's no way for us to send it a message back, and if we try, we'll get a null reference error and it will crash our game. Same for our player. What if during the time that we're updating our lives, our player has been destroyed and we wanted to send a message back to the player at some point? We don't want to do that. So we just want to receive messages. But however, in order to do that, I need to know how many lives are left for the player. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say public void update lives, and we're going to create a variable that's going to store how many lives the player has. So I'm going to call this an int variable because it's storing lives and we have whole numbers, right? We have 1, 2, or 3 lives, or 0. And what we're doing here is we're saying public void update lives int, and what do I want to call this variable? This variable can be named anything I want. I'm going to go ahead and call it current lives. And what this value is going to hold is the value that the player gives us. So when the player communicates with us, it's going to go ahead and say UI manager.update lives, and it's going to pass in how many lives it has. The value that the player passes into its method will be this variable right here, and we can make use of that variable, and the value assigned to it will be whatever the player told it to be. So that's how we're going to make use of this. And these are called custom methods with parameters or arguments. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up. So here we go. We have our lives array, which holds all the sprites we're going to be using. And here we're updating our lives, and we get the current lives from the player. So what we want to do now is we want to access, we're going to say lives, and I want to access the current lives of the player. So if the lives is 3, which image do I want to display? I want to display 3, right? There's 4 elements. The third would be the last one, which is all 3 lives. If the player only has 2 lives, we'll display 2. If he has 1, and if he has no lives, we'll display 0. But how do we display it? Well, as everything else, it's a very hierarchical structure. So let's go ahead and look at the hierarchy. Click on your canvas, click on your UI manager, and let's head over to the player lives component. I want to change this image component. And more specifically, I want to change the source image. I want to take the current sprite and assign it a new sprite. In order to do that, I also have to have access to this image. So if we look at our UI manager, I have access to the sprites that I want to swap out, but I don't even have access to the actual game object who houses the image component that I'm going to be manipulating. So we need a variable reference to our image component. So let's open up our script. And let's go ahead and start typing out public image. Now, you'll notice that we don't have an image component. And the reason for that is because it's part of the UI library of Unity. So similar to how we have using Unity Engine, which allows us to create mono behaviors, we need to gain access to the Unity Engine.ui, which will give us all the access to the UI elements of the Unity editor. So here, now we can go ahead and we can type public image, and everything is all good and dandy. So here we go. So public image, and we're going to go ahead and say lives image. We'll go inside lives image display. That should work. We'll go ahead and save this. Head back into Unity, and let's go ahead and drag the player lives game object to the open slot. So if we click on our canvas, you'll see here lives image display. It's the player lives, and it's expecting a game object with an image component. And you'll find here we have an image component. The canvas, our UI manager, automatically grabs that image component. Now what we want is we want to go to the image component, which we have a reference to using our player lives, and we want to grab the source image. So if I wanted to update the image display, I would say lives image display, which is our variable to the reference. Then we'd type dot, and I need to say source image, which is technically a sprite. So we're actually going to access sprite. And it says the sprite that is used to render this image. So we're going to get the current sprite, and we're going to assign it a new sprite. And that new sprite is stored in our array. And which element do we want to display? We want to display the current lives variable or value that we received from our player. So we'll go ahead and save this. And now how do we actually make this work? Well, we do traditional script communication. So if we're on our player now, for instance, let's go ahead and update this right when the game starts. So what I want you guys to do is click on this, click on your player lives, and right now its image is set to 3, set it to no lives. And what I want to do is when the game starts, I want the player to automatically update the display with how many lives it has when the game has started. So to do that, we have a variable in here called lives, which is 3. We want to pass this over to our UI manager, and we do that through normal script communication. So first things first, go ahead, you need a handler to your UI manager. So we'll create that here. So private UI manager, and we'll call it UI manager. And then you need to take that handler and you need to get the component you want, which is the UI manager. Before we can do that, we need to know where the UI manager lives. So here we are on the player. I need to go to the canvas and then get a UI manager component. So what we're going to do is we're going to say underscore UI manager equals capital G game object. We're going to find the object called canvas, and then we're going to grab the component we want, which is our UI manager. Now that we have access to the UI manager, we can go ahead and call the method update lives. So right in start, we're going to go ahead, and first thing we want to do is we want to check if we actually found the UI manager before making any action on it. So let's null check our UI manager. So here we're going to say if UI manager does not equal null, meaning that we did find it, then what do we want to do? We want to say UI manager dot update lives. And when we open a parenthesis, it says pass in your current lives. Well, we're going to pass in our variable called lives. We'll save that, head back into your UI manager. Let's go ahead and print the value that the player gave us. So let's go ahead and create a debug.log. And we'll go ahead and say player lives, and we'll append, using the plus sign, current lives. We'll save this. Let's go ahead and run our game. What should happen is we should go from having no lives to a full set of lives. And you'll see here we did. Okay, and just to give you an idea here of what we're going to be doing dynamically, is if we hop into the player and we open up our lives here, let's go ahead and just put in 1 lives. And you'll see here that 1 will get passed to the UI manager. So current lives will have a value of 1. And we're saying lives 1, which is our second element. So by doing that, we should have 1 life when we start. And you'll see here, as soon as I start the game, we have 1 life. So now what we need to do is we need to update this live system. When should we call this method? This method should be called when we do damage to the player. So here we have a damage method, right? So inside here, when we subtract the life, we now want to send this updated value to our UI manager. So here we're going to say UI manager dot update lives, and we're going to pass in our lives. We'll go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and test this out. We should have a functioning lives system. So here we go. We have, I hard coded in to give the player 1 life there. Let's head back up here and update lives. We're going to use our lives variable. Okay, go ahead and save this. Let's go ahead and test this out again. Okay, and you can see here that as I get destroyed, nothing is actually happening. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, there is. Oh, I must have had a shield on the first time. All right, and there we go. And now we have no lives and the player gets destroyed. So there you go. We have a working live system. It's easy as that. In the next video, we'll go ahead and set up our score.